The hardest thing to accept about betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the fact that it never comes from your enemies. Enemies are predictable. They stand in the light, their intentions clear, their malice an honest thing you can prepare for. Betrayal requires a key to your front door. It requires an invitation to your dinner table. It requires a lifetime of love, of scraped knees kissed better, of college tuitions paid, of midnight worries and silent prayers. For me, betrayal wore a designer suit, smelled of expensive scotch, and called me Mom. I am Eleanor Vance. If you live in Massachusetts, you might know my name, or at least the name of the real estate empire my late husband and I built from the ground up. We spent 40 years turning dilapidated brick buildings in Boston into premium commercial spaces. We amassed wealth that most people only read about. But at 70 years old, sitting in the sprawling, echoing library of my Beacon Hill estate, I had come to realize a terrifying truth. All the money in the world cannot buy you a loyal child, and it certainly cannot buy back your own mind. Or at least that is what I believed was happening to me. The fog had rolled in slowly, so insidiously that I didn't notice the dampness until I was already soaked through to the bone. It started with small things about 6 months ago. My reading glasses, usually resting on the mahogany side table, would vanish, only to be found hours later in the refrigerator crisper drawer. I would find myself standing in the grand foyer, staring at the imported chandelier, entirely unable to remember if I was coming in or going out. Then came the trembling hands, the sudden terrifying spikes of heart-pounding anxiety, and the shadowy, shifting shapes in my peripheral vision when the house was quiet. I was a woman who had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts without blinking, a woman who could recall the square footage of any of our 50 properties from memory. Now I felt like a fragile, hollowed-out bird, terrified of my own shadow. And right there, holding my trembling hand through the darkness, was my daughter-in-law, Chloe. "Oh, Eleanor, don't you worry," Chloe would croon, her voice as smooth and sweet as poisoned honey. She would stroke my hair with her manicured fingers, the diamond on her wedding band, the one I paid for, catching the soft lamplight. "We're going to take such good care of you. The doctor said these memory lapses are perfectly normal for your age. You just need your rest." Chloe was 38, a former junior publicist who had married my son Arthur 5 years ago. On the surface, she was the picture of devoted familial piety. When my episodes began, she insisted on moving into the east wing of the estate. She fired my longtime housekeeper, claiming the woman was stealing from me, and took over the administration of my daily life. She poured my tea. She sorted my mail. And, most importantly, she managed my new, extensive regimen of daily medications. "Time for your vitamins, Eleanor," she would announce, walking into the library with a silver tray. There was always a little blue pill, a white oval one, and a heavy, chalky pink capsule. If I hesitated, if I looked at those pills with the lingering, sharp instinct of the businesswoman I used to be, Arthur would appear in the doorway. Arthur, my only child. At 42, he was handsome in a weak, soft sort of way. He possessed his father's striking jawline, but none of the steel behind the eyes. I had spent my life smoothing the road for him, bailing out his failed startup ventures, quietly covering his reckless spending, hoping one day he would finally step up and fill the shoes waiting for him. "Come on, Mom," Arthur would say, his voice tight, his eyes darting away from mine. He rarely looked me in the eye anymore. The skin around his eyes was perpetually red, his movements restless, like a man waiting for a bomb to go off. "Chloe's just trying to help. You know what, Doctor?" Evan said. "If you don't take your supplements, the dementia will progress faster. You don't want us to have to look into care facilities, do you?" That was the threat. The invisible cage they had built around me. Take the pills, accept the fog, or be locked away in a pristine white room where no one would ever hear me scream. So I swallowed the pills, and within an hour, the world would turn to cotton. My tongue would grow heavy, the room would spin, and I would fall into a thick, dreamless stupor, unaware of the hushed, urgent conversations happening just down the hall. It was a Tuesday morning when the trap was finally sprung. I had woken up feeling unusually clear-headed. I had secretly spat out the pink capsule into a potted fern the night before, a small, desperate act of rebellion that left my heart racing. I was sitting in the sunroom, looking out at the manicured lawns, when Arthur and Chloe walked in. They were dressed impeccably, Arthur in a navy blazer and deck shoes, Chloe in white linen, looking like a spread from a yachting magazine. "Mom," Arthur said, rubbing his hands together. There was a manic, frantic energy rolling off him. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. We have a surprise for you. We're going out on the water today. I frowned, pulling my cashmere shawl tighter around my shoulders. The water? Arthur, darling, I don't think I'm up for a boat ride. The wind and my balance. It hasn't been good. Chloe rushed forward, kneeling beside my chair. She smelled overwhelmingly of heavy floral perfume. Nonsense, Eleanor. The sea air is exactly what you need. A change of scenery. It's a beautiful day, and Arthur chartered a private yacht just for the three of us. A family day. No doctors, no stress. She pulled out her phone, the screen already angled toward me. Look, I'm taking a video for the family album. Say hi to the camera, Eleanor. Tell everyone how excited you are. I blinked, momentarily blinded by the recording light. I hated that phone. It felt like every time I was confused, every time I stumbled over a word or dropped a teacup, Chloe's lens was right there, capturing my humiliation. Chloe, please, put that away. I look a fright. You look beautiful, Mom, Arthur said, though his voice cracked slightly. He stepped forward and grabbed my arm, a little too hard. His grip was bruising. We're going. It's already paid for. Please, Mom, just do this one thing for me. There was something in his tone, a raw, naked desperation that pierced through the residual fog in my brain. It wasn't a request. It was a plea. My mother's instinct, that ancient, foolish thing that overrides all logic and self-preservation, flared to life. My son was in pain. My son needed me to go on this boat. All right, I murmured, letting him pull me to my feet. All right, Arthur, let me get my coat. The drive to the marina was suffocatingly quiet. Arthur gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were bone white. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, tapping her phone screen with rapid staccato movements, texting furiously. I sat in the back, the thick leather seats feeling uncomfortably cold. I watched the Massachusetts coastline roll by, a sense of profound, cold dread pooling in my stomach. The sky was overcast, the water in the distance a churning, bruised gray. It was not a beautiful day for sailing. When we arrived at this private dock, the yacht was waiting. It was a massive, sleek vessel, cold and modern. The captain, a hired hand who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, helped us aboard, gave a brief safety instruction that Arthur completely ignored, and then retreated to the bridge. As we pulled out into the open waters of the Atlantic, the shoreline began to shrink, the safety of land disappearing into the mist. The wind was biting, whipping my gray hair around my face. I gripped the steel railing of the aft deck, my knuckles aching with the cold. Chloe emerged from the cabin holding a silver tray with 3 flutes of champagne. The recording light on her phone, which was tucked into her breast pocket, was blinking red. A toast, Chloe said, her voice unnaturally loud over the roar of the engines. She handed me a glass. To family, and to making sure the Vance legacy is in the right hands. I didn't drink. I looked at the golden liquid, then at my daughter-in-law. Her eyes were flat, completely devoid of empathy. She looked at me the way an accountant looks at a column of numbers that needs to be erased. Arthur, I said, my voice trembling. I turned to my son. He was standing near the edge of the deck, staring down at the churning black water. The wake of the boat was violent, churning up white foam. Arthur, I want to go back. I don't feel well. Please tell the captain to turn around. Arthur didn't move. He didn't even look at me. We can't go back, Mom. What do you mean we can't? I took a step toward him, the deck shifting under my feet. Of course we can. You chartered this boat. Tell him to turn around. Arthur, tell her, Chloe snapped. The sweet, cloying facade was entirely gone. Her voice was sharp, a whip cracking in the salty air. Tell her why we're out here. Arthur finally turned to face me. His face was a mask of sheer terror and pathetic resolve. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the ocean spray. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I didn't want it to come to this. But Chloe said it's the only way. The men, they're going to kill me, Mom. If I don't pay them by Friday, they're going to kill me. Pay who? I cried out, the wind snatching the words from my mouth. Arthur, what have you done? If you need money, just tell me. We can call the lawyers. We can liquidate. You wouldn't understand, he screamed, his voice breaking. You think I'm a failure. You look at me and you see Dad and you know I'll never be him. It was supposed to be a sure thing. The crypto, all of it. But it crashed, and I borrowed money from people. Bad people. $15 million, Mom. 15 million. The number hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. We can fix this, I said, stepping closer to him, reaching out my trembling hands. Arthur, listen to me. I am your mother. I will fix this. We'll go to the police. We'll get you protection. It's too late for that, Eleanor, Chloe interrupted. She had stepped up behind me. I could feel the cold radiating off her. The estate is locked up in that archaic trust of yours. You refuse to give Arthur the power of attorney. You refuse to let him be a man. Now the only way he gets the money to save his own life is if you're not here to control it anymore. I spun around to face her. You planned this. The pills, the memory loss. You were drugging me. Chloe smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. It's called building a narrative, darling, and I've built a masterpiece. You see, the doctors have thoroughly documented your tragic, rapid cognitive decline. The videos I've taken show a confused, unstable elderly woman. When you tragically wander too close to the railing and fall overboard today, well, it will just be the sad conclusion to a terrible disease. A terrible, unpredictable accident. No one will believe you, I breathed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Everyone will believe me, Chloe whispered. They already do. She nodded at Arthur. I turned back to my son, the boy I had carried for 9 months, the boy whose fever I had broken with cool washcloths, the boy who was now taking a step toward me, his hands raised. Arthur, no, I pleaded, backing away until my spine hit the cold steel railing. Arthur, look at me. It's Mommy, please. Close your eyes, Mom, Arthur sobbed, his entire body shaking. Please, just close your eyes. It will be fast. I'm so sorry. Arthur! I screamed, a guttural primal sound of absolute heartbreak. He lunged forward. I felt his hands, large, sweating, terrified hands, hit my shoulders. There was a violent shove. The world tilted. The gray sky spun out of view. My feet left the deck. For a fraction of a second, I was suspended in the air. I saw Chloe's face, calm and victorious, looking down at me. I saw Arthur collapse onto his knees, burying his face in his hands. Then the Atlantic Ocean swallowed me whole. The cold was not just a temperature, it was a physical assault. It hit me like a concrete wall, driving every ounce of breath from my lungs in an agonizing rush. The water was pitch black, a freezing void that instantly paralyzed my muscles. My heavy cashmere coat and thick slacks, which had kept me warm on the deck, immediately transformed into a lead weight, dragging me down into the abyss. Panic, raw and blinding, exploded in my brain. I opened my eyes, but there was only darkness and the sting of salt. My lungs burned, screaming for air. I kicked my legs, thrashing wildly against the crushing pressure, but I was sinking fast. The sheer shock of the freezing water was causing my heart to flutter erratically. This is it, a quiet voice in my head whispered. This is how you die, murdered by your own flesh and blood. But as the darkness began to close in at the edges of my vision, another emotion rose up, pushing past the panic, pushing past the heartbreak. Rage, pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. I was Eleanor Vance. I had clawed my way to the top of a male-dominated industry. I had survived a loveless marriage, the brutal business world, and a lifetime of underestimation. I was not going to die at the bottom of the ocean because a pathetic, weak man and his gold-digging wife decided my time was up. Adrenaline, fiery and potent, flooded my system. I reached down with fingers that felt like blocks of ice and fumbled with the buttons of my heavy coat. 1, 2, 3. I shrugged my shoulders violently, letting the coat slide off my arms and sink into the dark. Lighter now, I kicked upward, aiming for the faint, pale glow of light far above me. My lungs were on fire. Black spots danced across my vision. I kicked and clawed at the water, my 70-year-old joints screaming in protest. Just as I felt my mouth opening involuntarily to draw in a breath of seawater, my head broke the surface. I gasped, sucking in the freezing, salty air in great, ragged heaves. The waves were massive, tossing me around like a rag doll. I choked on seawater as a wave crashed over my head. "Help!" I tried to scream, but my voice was barely a croak over the roar of the ocean. I spun around, treading water frantically. In the distance, disappearing into the gray mist, was the white hull of Arthur's chartered yacht. They hadn't stopped. They hadn't even slowed down. They were leaving me to die. I was alone in the open ocean. My limbs were rapidly growing numb. The hypothermia was setting in, making my thoughts sluggish. "Keep moving," I ordered myself. "Do not stop moving." But the waves were relentless, beating me down, pushing me under again and again. I don't know how long I fought. It could have been 10 minutes, it could have been an hour. The sky began to darken, the gray turning to a bruising purple. My kicks grew weaker. The rage was burning out, replaced by a deep, seductive exhaustion. "Just go to sleep," the ocean seemed to whisper. "It's so much easier to just stop fighting." I closed my eyes as another wave crested over me, lacking the strength to hold my breath. Suddenly, something hard and abrasive scraped against my arm. I flailed, my hand grabbing onto something solid. Wood. I forced my eyes open, stinging with salt. I had been washed up against the side of an old, weathered wooden piling. Looking up, I saw the underside of a dilapidated dock jutting out from a rocky, heavily forested shoreline. I had drifted to one of the countless small, uninhabited islands that dotted the Massachusetts coastline. Summoning the absolute last reserve of my strength, I wrapped my arms around the barnacle-crusted piling. The sharp shells sliced into my forearms, drawing blood, but the pain grounded me. I pulled myself up, inch by agonizing inch, out of the freezing water and dragged my body onto the slick, rotting wooden planks of the dock. I collapsed onto my stomach, my cheek pressed against the wet wood. I was shaking so violently my teeth felt like they were cracking. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I lay there, listening to the relentless pounding of the waves, hovering on the precipice between life and death. Through the roaring in my ears, I heard a sound. Footsteps, heavy boots walking across the wooden planks. I couldn't lift my head. The vibrations moved closer, stopping right beside me. "Holy hell!" a rough, gravelly voice muttered. Rough, calloused hands, strong and surprisingly warm, grabbed my shoulders, turning me onto my back. I forced my eyes open. Standing over me was a man. He looked to be in his 60s, his face deeply lined and weathered by the sun and sea. He wore a heavy canvas jacket and a thick wool beanie pulled low over a mess of gray hair. His eyes, a piercing pale blue, scanned my face with intense focus. "You're freezing to death, lady," he said, his voice urgent. He didn't ask questions, he didn't hesitate. He stripped off his heavy canvas jacket and wrapped it tightly around my shivering body. Then he slid his arms under me, lifting my dead weight effortlessly against his chest. "Hang on," he said, turning and walking rapidly down the dock toward the thick line of pine trees. "I've got you. Just keep breathing." I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong thump of his heartbeat. The darkness finally overtook me, but as I slipped into unconsciousness, the last thought that registered in my mind wasn't of the freezing water or the terror of the fall. It was the image of my son's face and the absolute certainty that I was going to destroy his life. The return to the land of the living was not a peaceful awakening. It was a violent, agonizing crawl through fire and ice. I don't know how many days I spent trapped in the delirium. Time lost all meaning in the suffocating darkness of my fever. I remember fragments, the crackle of a wood-burning stove, the smell of pine needles and damp wool, and the searing, unspeakable pain in my bones. But the worst part wasn't the hypothermia. The cold had nearly stopped my heart, but it was the absence of Chloe's vitamins that was tearing my mind apart. My body was going through severe chemical withdrawal. I would wake up screaming, my tailored slacks and ruined silk blouse soaked in freezing sweat, my muscles violently seizing. I threw up until there was nothing left but bitter yellow bile, my ribs aching with every dry heave. Through the haze of agony, I would feel the rough, calloused hands of the man who had pulled me from the ocean. He would hold a tin cup to my chapped lips, forcing warm, salty broth down my throat. His voice a low, steady rumble that anchored me to reality. "Breathe, lady. Just breathe," he would say, holding my shoulders down as the tremors racked my frail frame. "You gotta sweat the poison out. Whatever they put in you, it's fighting to stay." The poison. On the morning of what I later learned was my 4th day in the cabin, the fever finally broke. I opened my eyes, and for the first time in 6 months, the world wasn't blurred at the edges. The oppressive, heavy blanket that had been smothering my brain was gone. I lay perfectly still on the narrow cot, staring up at the exposed wooden beams of the ceiling. I listened to the rhythmic crashing of the waves outside. I felt the rough texture of the wool blanket against my chin. I counted the knots in the wood paneling. 1, 2, 3, 4. I multiplied them. I divided them. I recited the addresses of my first 10 commercial properties in Boston, including the zip codes. My mind was a steel trap again. The cognitive fog, the paralyzing anxiety, the terrifying lapses in short-term memory, they had all evaporated, washed away by the freezing Atlantic and sweated out into the sheets of a stranger's bed. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train, stealing the breath from my lungs. It had never been dementia. It had never been Alzheimer's or age-related cognitive decline or a tragic unraveling of my senior years. It was a chemical lobotomy. Chloe, my sweet, attentive daughter-in-law, with her designer perfumes and her soft, patronizing smiles. She hadn't been managing my decline. She had been manufacturing it. The pink capsules, the blue pills. She had been systematically dosing me with a cocktail of heavy sedatives, antipsychotics, and hallucinogens. She had created the symptoms of dementia, paraded me in front of high-priced neurologists who saw exactly what she wanted them to see, and meticulously documented my illness on her smartphone. They had locked me in a prison inside my own head. They had stolen my agency, my dignity, and my reputation, turning me into a helpless, babbling liability so Arthur could take the reins of my empire. I pushed the blankets aside and sat up. My joints screamed, my muscles weak and atrophied, but my hands were no longer shaking. I looked down at them, spotted with age, the skin paper-thin but steady. The hands that had signed multi-million-dollar deals, the hands that had rocked Arthur to sleep. A fresh, cold wave of grief washed over me, threatening to pull me under. My son, my Arthur. He had known. Even if Chloe was the mastermind, Arthur had stood by and watched his mother be chemically dismantled day by day. He had watched me cry in terror at the hallucinations. He had driven me to the marina. He had pushed me into the freezing abyss. I closed my eyes, allowing myself exactly 1 minute to mourn the boy I had raised. I let the tears fall, hot and bitter, grieving the death of my only child. Because the man who had pushed me off that yacht was not my son. He was a parasite, and I was going to exterminate him. "You're awake." I opened my eyes and looked toward the doorway. The man stood there, holding a bundle of chopped firewood. In the daylight, I could see him clearly. He was a hard man, carved from granite and salt spray. He had a thick, unkempt gray beard, deep-set pale blue eyes that held an intelligence he tried to hide, and a posture that screamed military discipline despite his civilian clothes. "I am," I said. My voice was raspy, completely stripped of its usual polished cadence, but it was steady. "And I am alive, thanks to you." He walked in, dropping the wood by the iron stove. "Name's Ben Carter. This is my place. It ain't the Ritz, but it keeps the wind out." "I am Eleanor Vance," I replied, pulling the blanket around my shoulders like a shawl. "And it is the most beautiful room I have ever seen, Mr. Carter." Ben poured black coffee from a percolator into a chipped ceramic mug and handed it to me. His eyes studied my face, assessing me. "You stopped shaking yesterday. The fever's gone. Whatever narcotics you were strung out on, your system is clean now. You want to tell me how a woman wearing a $5,000 silk blouse ends up drowning off the coast of an uninhabited island?" I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and strong, and it tasted like salvation. I was pushed. Ben didn't flinch. He just leaned against the wooden counter, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "I figured. People who fall by accident usually try to swim toward the boat. You were swimming away from it. Who pushed you?" "My son and his wife." For a long moment, the only sound in the cabin was the crackle of the fire. Ben's jaw tightened. "All right," he said quietly, his voice dangerously soft. "I've got a shortwave radio in the back. I can patch through to the Coast Guard in Gloucester. Have the state police waiting at the marina in an hour. We'll get you a doctor, get this on the record, and lock those bastards up before the sun goes down." He turned to walk toward the back room, but my voice stopped him. "No." Ben paused, looking back at me with a deep frown. "Lady, I don't think you understand. They tried to murder you. You need the authorities." "You are the one who doesn't understand, Mr. Carter," I said, my tone hardening. I wasn't an old, frightened woman anymore. I was Eleanor Vance, CEO, founder, and survivor. If I walk into a police station right now, do you know what will happen? They'll take your statement. "They will look at my name," I corrected him. and they will see the name of one of the wealthiest women in New England. Then they will contact my next of kin, my son. He will rush to the station, weeping tears of joy. He will show the police my extensive medical files, signed by top neurologists, stating that I am suffering from severe, advanced dementia and paranoia. I set the mug down on the bedside table. He will show them videos of me hallucinating. He will tell them I wandered away, that I have a history of delusions. The police will look at a raving 70-year-old woman claiming her loving, wealthy son tried to drown her, and they will look at a respected businessman with medical proof of my insanity. Who do you think they will believe? Ben stared at me, the grim reality of the situation settling over him. He was a man who knew how the world worked. He knew that money and paperwork always beat the frantic claims of a victim. They'd put you in a psych ward, Ben muttered, running a hand through his gray hair. Exactly, I said, my voice dripping with ice. They will put me in a facility. Arthur will be granted emergency conservatorship. He will have legal, total control of my $3 billion estate, and I will be locked in a padded room where they will pump me full of the very same drugs I just spent 4 days sweating out of my system. If I go to the police, Ben, I am handing them the weapon to finish the job. Ben walked back over, pulling up a wooden chair and sitting heavily in it. $3 billion, he repeated, shaking his head. Well, that explains the murder attempt. So what's the play, Eleanor? You can't hide in my cabin forever. Eventually, you've got to go back to the world. I am not hiding, I said softly, a dangerous smile touching the corners of my lips. I am preparing. My son pushed a vulnerable, drugged, terrified old woman off that boat. He thinks he killed a helpless victim. He has no idea that the freezing water woke up the woman who built an empire. I swung my legs over the side of the cot. My ruined, salt-stained slacks were stiff against my legs. I reached down to the waistband. Before Arthur's father died, he had been a man who survived the crashes of the 70s and the dot-com bubble. He had taught me one very important lesson. Never trust an institution to protect you in an emergency. I dug my fingernails into the thick inner seam of the waistband and ripped the fabric. Ben watched in silent curiosity as I pulled a flat, waterproof, vacuum-sealed pouch from the hidden silk lining. I tore the plastic open with my teeth and pulled out a thick stack of crisp $100 bills. $50,000. I never traveled anywhere without it. I tossed a stack of bills onto the small wooden table. It landed with a heavy thud. What I need, Mr. Carter, is a proxy, a ghost. I cannot show my face on the mainland, and I cannot use my credit cards without alerting Arthur. I looked him directly in the eyes. Are you a man who can run an errand without asking too many questions? Ben looked at the cash, then back up at me. A slow, deeply appreciative grin spread across his weathered face. I was a Marine recon scout for 15 years, Mrs. Vance. I excel at running errands without being seen. What do you need? I need a high-end laptop with enough processing power to run decryption software, I listed off, the businesswoman inside me taking full control. I need 3 untraceable burner phones. I need a secure, encrypted mobile Wi-Fi hotspot. I need access to public property records. And I need a fresh change of clothes that doesn't smell like the bottom of the ocean. You're going after the money, Ben observed, leaning back in his chair. Arthur is an idiot, I said flatly. Before he pushed me, he confessed that he owes $15 million to some very dangerous people. He tried to kill me because my estate is locked in a trust, and my death was his only way to trigger the inheritance and pay off his debts. If I am dead, the money transfers to him in 30 days. So you stop the transfer? No, I said, my eyes narrowing as the blueprint of my revenge finalized in my mind. If I simply stop the transfer, they will know I am alive, and they will come looking for me. No, Ben, I am going to let them think they have won. I am going to let them celebrate. I am going to let them start spending money they don't have. I picked up the mug of coffee, the warmth seeping back into my cold hands. Arthur and Chloe used my medical records as a weapon to strip me of my power. I am going to use the very legal and financial systems they covet to build a cage so tight, so suffocating, they will beg me to put them in prison just to escape it. But first, we need to go back to my house. Ben's eyebrows shot up. Your house? The one currently occupied by the people who murdered you? Yes, I replied calmly. My original will and the master ledgers for the offshore accounts are kept in a biometric safe in my study. I need those documents to set the trap, and I need to see exactly what lies they have been telling the world since my tragic drowning. Ben let out a low whistle, shaking his head, though the respect in his eyes was undeniable. He stood up, scooping the stack of cash off the table and shoving it into his heavy canvas jacket. "I'll take my skiff to the mainland," Ben said. "It'll take me a few hours to gather the tech you want without raising flags. You eat the rest of that soup, Eleanor. You're going to need your strength if we're breaking into a billionaire's fortress." "Take your time, Ben," I said, settling back against the pillows, my mind racing with account numbers, legal clauses, and the sweet metallic taste of vengeance. I have nowhere to be. As far as the world is concerned, Eleanor Vance is already dead, and the dead have nothing but patience. Ben returned just as the bruised purple of the twilight sky bled into pitch black. He carried 2 heavy duffel bags, dropping them onto the wooden floorboards of the cabin with a solid thud. Inside were the tools of my resurrection: a matte black laptop, 3 sleek burner phones, a mobile encrypted router, and a change of clothes: black wool trousers, a dark cashmere turtleneck, and soft-soled leather walking shoes. It wasn't my usual tailored Chanel, but it was exactly what a ghost needed to move through the shadows. "We leave in an hour," Ben said, tossing me a dark wool peacoat. "Tide's in our favor. I've got a truck parked at a private slip near the harbor. But I'll ask you one last time, Eleanor. Are you sure you want to do this yourself? I can go in, grab the files, and get out. You don't need to risk your neck." I fastened the heavy buttons of the coat, the fabric scratching slightly against my chin. "It is my house, Mr. Carter. I know every creaking floorboard, every blind spot of the security cameras I had installed, and every password my son was too lazy to change. More importantly, I need to see it for myself. I need to see what they have done with my home." The boat ride to the mainland was a masterclass in stealth. Ben navigated the dark, choppy waters without running lights, slipping into a forgotten, rotting pier on the outskirts of Boston Harbor. From there, we took his battered, unregistered Ford pickup truck into the heart of the city. Beacon Hill at midnight is a portrait of historic wealth. Gas lamps cast a warm, flickering glow over the uneven cobblestone streets. Federal-style brick townhouses stand shoulder to shoulder, their heavy oak doors guarding generations of old money. My estate sat at the top of the hill, a sprawling 4-story fortress of ivy-covered brick and wrought iron. Ben parked 2 blocks away, in the shadow of a towering elm tree. We walked the rest of the way in silence, the November chill biting at our faces. "The perimeter cameras," Ben whispered as we approached the heavy iron gates of the rear alleyway. "Pointed at the gate latch in the garage," I whispered back, not missing a beat. I led him to a section of the brick wall concealed by overgrown climbing roses. My late husband, Robert, was paranoid about security, but he was also a creature of habit. He wanted a way to slip out to his private club without the security detail logging his movements. I reached into the thorny tangle of vines, my fingers finding the cold steel of a hidden keypad set flush into the brick. I punched in a 6-digit code, the date of our wedding. A quiet click echoed in the damp air, and a narrow section of the wrought iron fence swung inward on perfectly oiled hinges. We slipped onto the grounds, moving silently across the manicured lawn toward the terrace doors. The house was dark, a massive sleeping beast. "Alarm?" Ben breathed, hovering by the glass. "Arthur is a creature of immense laziness," I replied, pulling a pair of thin leather gloves from my pockets. "He complained constantly about the multi-tiered alarm system. He only ever sets the perimeter laser grid. The glass break sensors are disabled." I produced a small, flat titanium key I had kept hidden in my shoe, a master key that bypassed the digital locks. I slid it into the terrace door, turned it, and pushed. The door yielded with a soft sigh. Stepping into my own home felt like stepping into a tomb. The air was thick and heavy, smelling faintly of Chloe's cloying floral perfume and the sterile scent of commercial cleaning products. I led Ben through the grand dining room, our rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the Persian rugs. In the dim light pouring in from the street lamps outside, I could see the subtle violations of my space. My collection of antique Ming vases had been pushed aside to make room for gaudy, modern abstract sculptures. The family portrait that had hung over the fireplace, a painting of Robert, myself, and a 10-year-old Arthur, was gone, replaced by a massive, hollow-looking mirror. They were erasing me, systematically and without an ounce of sentimentality. I pushed the bitter taste of betrayal down into the pit of my stomach and signaled for Ben to follow me down the mahogany-paneled hallway to Robert's old study. The study was exactly as I had left it, an enclave of dark wood, leather bindings, and silence. Behind Robert's massive mahogany desk was a false bookshelf that concealed a wall-mounted, state-of-the-art biometric safe. "They haven't drilled it yet," Ben noted, running a small pen light over the steel surface. "Means they don't know what's in it, or they're waiting for the death certificate to clear so the lawyers will open it legally." "They think everything is handled through my primary corporate attorneys downtown," I said, stepping up to the safe. "They don't know that my most vital documents are kept here." I pressed my right thumb against the glowing green scanner. The machine whirred, reading my pulse and the unique ridges of my fingerprint. "Access granted," the tiny screen flashed. Heavy locking bolts retracted with a mechanical thunk, and the heavy steel door swung open. Inside were neat stacks of bound ledgers, offshore account numbers, and a single thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. I pulled the envelope out, a grim smile touching my lips. "The original will?" Ben asked, keeping watch at the door. "Better," I whispered, sliding the envelope into the inside pocket of my coat. "A poison pill." Ben raised an eyebrow in the dark. "About a month ago, during one of the brief windows when Chloe's drugs hadn't completely fogged my brain, I realized something was terribly wrong," I explained, my voice barely a breath. "I couldn't prove she was poisoning me, but my instincts were screaming. So I took a taxi to the suburbs and met with a retired estate lawyer, an old friend of Robert's who owed me his career. He isn't on the company payroll. Arthur and Chloe don't even know he exists." I tapped the pocket holding the envelope. "We drafted a shadow trust, an ironclad provision. It dictates that in the event of my death, specifically an unnatural, sudden, or violent death, my entire $3 billion estate is immediately transferred into a blind trust, frozen entirely for 10 years pending a sweeping independent investigation. Not a single penny can be liquidated, borrowed against, or inherited." Ben let out a soft, appreciative exhale. "So when your son goes to the bank on Monday with your death certificate, he will find out that he murdered me for absolutely nothing," I finished coldly. "But before I spring the trap, I need to understand the beast I am hunting. I need to know exactly who Arthur owes $15 million to." I moved from the safe to Arthur's side of the room, where he had set up his own sleek, modern workspace. His desktop computer was asleep. I tapped the keyboard, and the screen flared to life, illuminating the dark study with a harsh blue glow. A password prompt appeared. "You think you can guess it?" Ben asked, watching the hallway. "Arthur is a textbook narcissist who cannot remember anything that doesn't directly pertain to himself," I muttered. I typed in his own birthday, followed by the year he was born. The screen unlocked instantly. "Pathetic," Ben grunted. I ignored him, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I bypassed his mundane emails and went straight to his encrypted messaging app, the one he thought was secure. He had left the master session logged in. I opened a folder marked Urgent/Liabilities. The documents and message threads that populated the screen painted a picture of absolute financial carnage. Arthur hadn't just made a bad investment. He had leveraged millions of dollars of borrowed money in an unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchange that turned out to be a massive Ponzi scheme. When the scheme collapsed, his money vanished into the ether. But it wasn't a bank he had borrowed from. I opened the most recent message thread. It was from an encrypted account with a Russian domain. The messages were blunt, terrifying, and accompanied by photographs. "Time is up, Arthur. We hold the paper on your $15 million debt. We do not do extensions. Friday at noon, the accounts are settled, or we start taking pieces of you and your lovely wife." Attached was a photograph of Arthur getting out of his car at his country club, taken through the crosshairs of a rifle scope. "Jesus," Ben whispered, reading over my shoulder. "He's in bed with the Bratva, Russian syndicate out of New York. They don't send collection letters, Eleanor. They send cleaners. Your son is a dead man walking." I stared at the screen, a strange, hollow sensation echoing in my chest. My son, given every advantage, every elite education, every safety net in the world, had managed to put a mob hit on his own head out of sheer greed and stupidity. He hadn't pushed me off that boat to build an empire. He had murdered his mother just to cover his own colossal incompetence. I pulled a small flash drive from my pocket and quickly downloaded the entire folder, every threat, every bank routing number the syndicate had provided. Suddenly, Ben's hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. His posture went entirely rigid. Click, clack. The distinct, sharp sound of high heels against the hardwood floor upstairs. "Someone's awake," Ben breathed, instantly reaching to his hip where a heavy steel flashlight hung. The soft glow of the hallway chandelier flared to life, bleeding under the heavy oak doors of the study. The footsteps were coming down the grand staircase, moving directly toward us. "The closet!" I hissed, yanking the flash drive from the computer and plunging the screen back into darkness. We moved with desperate speed. Across the study was a deep walk-in closet lined with cedar, where Robert used to keep his vintage smoking jackets and humidor. Ben shoved me inside and pulled the heavy door shut, leaving it open just a fraction of an inch so we wouldn't suffocate. The study door clicked open. Through the tiny crack in the closet door, I saw Chloe walk in. She was wearing a silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly tousled. She didn't look like a grieving daughter-in-law. She looked victorious. She walked over to the antique liquor cabinet, poured herself a generous measure of Robert's 20-year-old scotch, and took a slow, savoring sip. She pulled her smartphone from her pocket and hit a speed dial, putting the phone on speaker and setting it on the desk. "It's 3 a.m, Chloe." Arthur's voice drifted from the phone, sounding thin, reedy, and utterly exhausted. He must have been in the master bedroom upstairs. "What is it?" "I couldn't sleep," Chloe said, her voice dripping with a terrifying, icy calmness. "I was just thinking about the timeline. The probate lawyers said we can petition for emergency access to the operating accounts by Monday, given your mother's tragic circumstances." "Don't," Arthur begged, his voice cracking. "Don't talk about it like that. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. I see her looking at me when she went over the rail." Inside the closet, the smell of cedar and old tobacco was suffocating. I pressed my hand against my mouth to quiet the sound of my own erratic breathing. Beside me, Ben stood perfectly still, a coiled spring ready to strike if the closet door opened. "Oh, grow up, Arthur," Chloe snapped, the sweet facade vanishing entirely, revealing the venomous snake beneath. "You did what you had to do. If you hadn't pushed her, those Russians would be carving us into pieces right now. She was a burden, a paranoid, confused old bat who was hoarding wealth she couldn't even use." "She was my mother, Chloe," Arthur shouted through the speaker. "She was terrified. I murdered her." "You saved us," Chloe corrected him coldly, taking another sip of scotch. "Stop whining. We're going to be billionaires by next week. The old bitch is finally at the bottom of the ocean where she belongs. You just keep your mouth shut, play the grieving son for the cameras, and let me handle the lawyers." She reached out and disconnected the call, leaving the study in silence. She stood there for a moment, looking around the room, a smirk playing on her lips. She ran her hand over the leather of Robert's chair, claiming it as her own. Then she turned, clicked off the lights, and walked back upstairs. We waited in the pitch-black closet for 10 agonizing minutes. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. When Ben finally pushed the door open, the fresh air hit my lungs like a physical blow. I didn't stumble. I didn't cry. The hollow ache in my chest had entirely vanished, replaced by something much harder, much colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Any lingering maternal instinct, any microscopic shred of pity I might have harbored for Arthur, was dead and cremated. He was weak, and Chloe was a monster. They were a perfect, toxic parasite. "Did you get everything you need?" Ben whispered, his eyes scanning the dark room. "Yes," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's scalpel. I touched the breast pocket of my coat, feeling the hard plastic of the flash drive and the thick wax seal of the Poison Pill Trust. "I have the motive, I have the legal weapon, and I have their absolute, unquestioning arrogance." We slipped back out through the terrace doors, melting into the shadows of the manicured lawn. We moved swiftly through the hidden gate and back out onto the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill. The city was silent, completely unaware that a dead woman was walking its streets. When we got back into the cab of the Ford pickup, Ben turned the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. He looked over at me, the glow of the dashboard illuminating the hard, uncompromising lines of his face. "So," he said softly, putting the truck into gear, "they think they've won. What happens when Monday comes around and they try to cash in?" I stared out the window at the receding silhouette of my mansion. "Monday is when the trap snaps shut," I replied, my eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "But I am not going to let the bank deliver the bad news, Ben. I am going to tighten the noose myself. I am going to give Arthur exactly what he wants. I am going to offer him a lifeline, and then I am going to watch him hang himself with it. The weekend passed in a tense, suspended animation. Back in the safety of Ben's island cabin, I spent Saturday and Sunday tracing the intricate web of my own finances, navigating through offshore accounts, dummy corporations, and blind trusts I hadn't touched since Robert died. I was a ghost moving through the digital ether, and my son was completely oblivious to the haunting that was about to begin. Monday morning broke with a violent, freezing rain that battered the Massachusetts coast. It was the perfect weather for a reckoning. Sitting at the small wooden table, my hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, I opened the encrypted connection to Arthur's laptop. Ben stood behind me, his silent presence a comforting weight in the room. "The probate offices open in 20 minutes, Ben noted, checking his watch. "Arthur won't even wait that long," I replied, keeping my eyes on the screen. "He'll call the primary firm directly. He needs that $15 million by Friday, or the Bratva will decorate his country club with his remains. He's running out of time." Right on cue, at 9:05 a.m., the digital monitoring software I had installed on Arthur's laptop flared to life. He was initiating a video conference with the senior partners at Vance Estate Management. I tapped a few keys, patching the audio feed directly into our secure router. The sound of my son's voice filled the small cabin. He sounded breathless, manic. "Gentlemen, thank you for taking this call so early. As you know, the circumstances of my mother's passing are tragic, but I have immediate liquidity needs to manage the estate's transition. I need to trigger the primary inheritance clauses and unfreeze the operating accounts today." There was a heavy, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Richard Sterling, a lawyer who had eaten at my dinner table countless times, cleared his throat. "Arthur," Richard began, his voice thick with practiced sympathy, "we are profoundly sorry for your loss. However, there has been a complication regarding Eleanor's estate." "What kind of complication?" Chloe's voice cut in, sharp and impatient. She must have been standing right next to him. "We have the medical records. We have the police report. She drowned. It's cut and dry." "It has nothing to do with the manner of her passing, Mrs. Vance," Richard said softly. "It is about a secondary, superseding document, a poison pill trust." I smiled, a slow, cold curving of my lips. Beside me, Ben crossed his arms, leaning in to listen. "What the hell is a poison pill?" Arthur demanded, his voice cracking. "It is an ironclad legal contingency," the lawyer explained. "Last month, your mother legally restructured her entire portfolio through an independent proxy. The clause stipulates that in the event of her unnatural, sudden, or unverified death, the entire $3 billion estate, including all liquid assets, properties, and trusts, is immediately frozen and locked in a blind escrow for exactly 10 years, pending a federal investigation." "No," Arthur whispered. It was the sound of a man watching the ground open up beneath his feet. No, you can't do that. I am the sole heir. I have power of attorney." "The power of attorney expired the moment she was presumed dead, Arthur," Richard said firmly. "And the new trust specifically nullifies any previous wills. We cannot authorize the release of a single penny. Your mother's assets are completely untouchable until the year 2036. I am sorry, Arthur. There is absolutely nothing we can do." The call disconnected. For a long moment, the audio feed from my house was dead silent. Then, a sound shattered the quiet. The violent, explosive crash of glass shattering against a wall. Arthur screamed, a primal, guttural roar of sheer terror. 10 years! Arthur shrieked, the sound of tearing paper and overturning furniture echoing through the microphone. "We are dead, Chloe. We are dead. They want their money on Friday." Stop it, look at me, Chloe yelled back, struggling to maintain her grip on him. "We'll leave the country. We'll pack the bags, take whatever jewelry is in the safe, and we'll fly to a non-extradition country tonight." "You stupid bitch, do you think the Russian mob cares about international borders?" Arthur sobbed, completely broken. "They have my passport flagged. They have men watching the house. We can't run. They're going to kill me." I reached out and muted the audio feed. The despair in his voice was palpable, thick, and suffocating. A week ago, hearing my child cry like that would have driven me to move mountains to save him. Today, it sounded like justice. "He's bleeding out," Ben said quietly. "He's desperate." "Desperation makes people sloppy," I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "It is time to throw him a lifeline." I opened a heavily encrypted, untraceable email client. I crafted a message directly to Arthur's private inbox using an offshore corporate alias that Robert had maintained decades ago, Blackwood Capital LLC. To Arthur Vance, I am a silent partner of your late father, Robert. I have been informed of the unfortunate freezing of the Vance estate. I am also aware of your pressing, undisclosed liabilities coming due this Friday. Your father left a shadow contingency fund with my firm for emergencies exactly such as this. I am prepared to immediately disperse $15 million to clear your debts. However, because the estate is frozen, this must be done quietly. Attached are the electronic disbursement and transfer documents. Sign them, have your wife co-sign as a witness, and return them via this encrypted channel. Upon receipt, the funds will be wired directly to your creditors. Do not fail your father's legacy. Blackwood. I hit send. We sat in silence, watching the monitor. 10 minutes passed, then 20. You think he'll bite? Ben asked, pouring himself another cup of coffee. A drowning man does not ask who threw the life preserver, I said. He just grabs it. At exactly 10:45 a.m., the notification chimed. An email had arrived from Arthur. Attached was the PDF document. I opened it. At the bottom of the last page, signed in frantic, sloppy digital ink, were the signatures of Arthur Vance and Chloe Vance. They hadn't read the fine print. They hadn't run it by a lawyer. They were too terrified to question the miracle that had just landed in their inbox. I downloaded the document, verified the digital signatures, and securely locked it into my cloud drive. Got them, I whispered. But the trap was not yet fully sprung. I needed them to turn on each other. I needed the rot to expose itself to the light. Wednesday and Thursday were a masterclass in psychological torture. I did not wire the money. I ignored Arthur's increasingly frantic, begging emails to the Blackwood alias. I let them sit in that massive empty house, listening to the ticking clock, jumping at every shadow, wondering if the Russians were coming through the door. By Thursday night, the pressure finally cracked the foundation of their marriage. At 11 p.m., my monitoring software flagged a new outgoing message from Chloe's private, supposedly secure phone. She wasn't messaging a lawyer. She was messaging the encrypted Russian domain. I opened the transcript, my blood running ice cold as I read the words my daughter-in-law was typing. Chloe, the money isn't coming. Arthur is a dead end. The estate is frozen. Bratva, contact. Then your husband is a dead man, and you are collateral. Chloe, I had nothing to do with his debts. Listen to me. I can give him to you. No security, no alarms. Tomorrow at noon, I will slip a sedative into his drink. He will be unconscious in the living room. I will leave the back terrace doors unlocked. Bratva, contact. What do you want in exchange? Chloe, 20 minutes. I just need 20 minutes a head start to pack the safe's contents and leave out the front door. You take Arthur, do whatever you want with him, and you let me walk away. There was a pause on the transcript. Then the reply came through. Bratva, contact. Deal. Friday. Noon. Ensure the doors are open, Mrs. Vance. I leaned back in the wooden chair, a deep, hollow laugh escaping my lips. There it was, the absolute, unvarnished truth. She was willing to drug her husband and hand-deliver him to a hit squad just to save her own skin and run off with a few diamond necklaces. She sold him out, Ben said, reading the screen. He shook his head in disgust. There is no honor among thieves. There is no honor at all, I corrected him. Only leverage. I closed the laptop and stood up. The storm outside had passed, leaving a crisp, freezing Friday morning in its wake. Get the truck, Ben, I said, putting on my heavy wool coat. It's time to go home. We arrived at Beacon Hill at 11:30 a.m. Ben had slipped onto the property an hour earlier, expertly bypassing the security systems and planting a series of micro cameras and a two-way audio speaker hidden in the grand living room's massive entertainment center. I sat in the passenger seat of the Ford pickup, parked a block away, watching the live feed on the laptop screen. The living room of my estate looked like a mausoleum. The curtains were drawn tight against the midday sun. Arthur was pacing back and forth across the Persian rug, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken and bruised with exhaustion. He looked like a cornered animal. Chloe was sitting on the leather sofa. She was fully dressed in a chic, dark traveling suit. A large, expensive leather duffel bag sat by her feet. In her hand, she held a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. "Drink this, Arthur," Chloe said, her voice smooth and maternal, a terrifying echo of how she used to speak to me when handing me my poisoned pills. "It's going to be okay. Blackwood will send the money. You just need to calm your nerves. Arthur stopped pacing, his hands shaking violently. He took the glass from her. What if they don't, Chloe? What if it's a scam? It's almost noon. Just drink, darling, she cooed. He downed the scotch in one long gulp. Almost instantly, the heavy sedative Chloe had crushed into the drink began to take effect. Arthur swayed on his feet, blinking rapidly. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Chloe? He mumbled, his knees buckling. I feel dizzy. Shh, she whispered, standing up and guiding his dead weight onto the sofa. Just rest, Arthur. The bad men are coming to take it all away. Arthur's eyes rolled back, and he slumped against the leather cushions, completely unconscious. Chloe didn't waste a single second. Her face hardened into a mask of pure reptilian survival. She picked up her duffel bag, checked her watch, and walked briskly out of the frame toward the front door. I heard the heavy oak door open and close. She was gone. She really left him, Ben murmured from the driver's seat. Keep watching, I said, my heart pounding a steady, relentless rhythm against my ribs. At exactly 12:01 p.m., the back terrace doors slid open. 3 men stepped into the living room. They were massive, dressed in dark, tailored suits that couldn't hide the bulk of the weaponry they carried. They moved with absolute, terrifying professionalism. The leader, a man with a thick, brutal scar running down his cheek, looked down at Arthur's unconscious body. He pulled a heavy, suppressed pistol from his jacket. Wake him up, the scarred man commanded in a thick Russian accent. The boss wants him to know why he's dying. One of the thugs grabbed Arthur by the collar, hauling him upright, and slapped him viciously across the face. Arthur groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He looked around in a drug-addled haze, his gaze finally locking onto the scarred man and the gun pointed directly at his forehead. No, Arthur whimpered, the sedative making his speech thick and slurred. Please, the money, it's coming. My wife. Where is Chloe? Your wife, the scarred man sneered. Opened the door for us and ran away. She traded your life for her jewelry, Vance. Pathetic. Tears streamed down Arthur's face. The reality of his utter abandonment, his complete failure, crashed down on him. He was going to die alone on his mother's sofa, sold out by the woman he had murdered for. The scarred man raised the gun, aiming right between Arthur's eyes. I pressed the transmit button on the laptop. I wouldn't pull that trigger if I were you, Nikolai. My voice boomed out of the surround sound speakers hidden in the entertainment center, echoing off the high ceilings of the living room. The 3 hitmen jumped, weapons instantly raised, scanning the empty room for a threat. Arthur gasped, his eyes wide with a terror that surpassed even the fear of the gun. Mom? He whispered, his voice trembling. The massive 70-inch smart TV above the fireplace suddenly flared to life. The screen flickered, and then my face appeared, broadcasted live from the webcam in the truck. I was not the frail, trembling, drugged woman they had pushed into the ocean. I was Eleanor Vance, dressed in black, my eyes burning with a cold, unrelenting fire. Hello, Arthur, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly controlled. Surprised to see me? You're dead, Arthur choked out, scrambling backward on the sofa. I watched you drown. You watched me fall, I corrected him sharply. I survived. I sweated your wife's poison out of my system in a freezing cabin, and I have spent the last week watching you destroy yourself. I shifted my gaze to the camera, looking directly at the leader of the hit squad. Nikolai, is it? Tell your boss, Yuri, that he needs to check his Cayman Islands holding account, the one ending in 448. Nikolai frowned, keeping his gun leveled at Arthur, but he pulled a sleek smartphone from his pocket. He tapped the screen, his eyes narrowing as he read a message. He looked up at the television screen, his expression shifting from aggression to profound confusion. The debt is cleared, Nikolai announced to his men, his voice thick with shock. 15 million, wired in 10 minutes ago. Arthur let out a massive, shuddering breath, dropping his head into his hands. Oh, thank God. Thank God. Mom, you paid them. You saved me. I did not save you, Arthur, I said, my voice slicing through his relief like a razor blade. I bought you. Arthur looked up, confusion mixing with the drugs in his system. The documents you and Chloe signed for the Blackwood alias, I explained, leaning closer to the camera so my face filled the massive screen. They were not disbursement forms, Arthur. They were promissory notes. I used my own private offshore capital, money completely untethered from the frozen estate, to pay the bratva. I bought your debt. I let the silence hang in the room, letting the crushing weight of reality settle on his narrow shoulders. You do not owe the Russians $15 million anymore, Arthur, I whispered. You owe it to me. I am your sole creditor. And the terms you blindly signed carry a 40% annual interest rate, backed by a confession of judgment. Nikolai, the ruthless mob enforcer, actually chuckled. He lowered his gun, looking at the screen with something akin to respect. You bought his paper. Cold blood, Mrs. Vance. He is my son, I replied evenly. I clean up his messes, but he is no longer your concern, Nikolai. Your boss has his money. You are trespassing in my home. Leave. Nikolai nodded, holstering his weapon. He looked down at Arthur, who was staring at the television screen in absolute catatonic horror. You should have let us shoot you, kid, Nikolai muttered. She's going to make it hurt a lot worse. The Russians turned and walked out the back terrace doors, disappearing into the cold afternoon, leaving Arthur completely alone with his mother. Mom, Arthur whimpered, sliding off the sofa and falling to his knees on the rug. Mom, please, I'm sorry. She made me do it. Chloe manipulated me. The drugs, the money, it was all her idea. She sold me out to them today. I know, I said. With a click of my mouse, I played the audio recording of Chloe's conversation with the bratva, her cold, calculating voice filling the room as she bargained his life away. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing into his hands. She is currently being arrested by the FBI at Logan Airport, I added calmly. Ben made an anonymous tip regarding a woman attempting to flee the country with $2 million of stolen, uninsured diamonds. Arthur looked up at the screen, a pathetic, broken shell of a man. What about me? Are you going to send me to prison too? I stared at the boy I had raised, the boy I had protected, financed, and loved with a blind, foolish devotion. I felt nothing. The maternal cord had been severed, cauterized by the freezing waters of the Atlantic. Prison is too easy, Arthur, I said. In prison, you get free meals and a bed. No. You confess to attempted murder on a recording I have saved in 3 different secure locations. The moment you try to run, the moment you try to file for bankruptcy, that recording goes to the district attorney. I leaned back, adjusting the collar of my dark coat. You owe me $15 million. Since you have no assets, you are going to get a job. You will work, Arthur. You will bag groceries or sweep streets or scrub toilets. And every single week, for the rest of your natural life, my lawyers will garnish your wages. You will live in a tiny, roach-infested apartment. You will never take a vacation. You will never eat in a fine restaurant. You will spend every waking moment of your miserable life paying me back for the cost of your own assassination attempt. Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely, utterly destroyed. The police are pulling up to the house now to take your statement regarding the home invasion, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. Tell them whatever you want, but remember who holds your leash. Goodbye, Arthur. I cut the feed. The screen went black. I closed the laptop and handed it to Ben. I let out a long, slow breath, watching my breath fog the cold glass of the truck window. The trembling in my hands was gone. The fog in my mind was a distant memory. It's over, Ben said quietly. Yes, I agreed, looking out at the historic, wealthy streets of Boston. It is. I am Eleanor Vance. My son pushed a vulnerable, trusting mother off a yacht, hoping she would sink to the bottom of the ocean. He didn't realize that the ocean doesn't just drown things. Sometimes the cold water strips away the weakness, washes away the illusions, and forges something entirely new. I survived my own murder. I destroyed the people who tried to bury me, and I took back my empire. If there is a lesson to be learned here, it is this. Never underestimate the women who built the world you so casually live in, because we know exactly how to tear it down.